Welcome to another episode of Come Together. We are live. Welcome, Zach. Is this
Hey,
first
thanks.
podcast that you did? You're doing?
No, I've done a couple before, and I actually used to host a podcast.
Oh, get out of here! Really?
Yeah,
Wait. What kind of podcast was it?
so it was probably about 10 years ago. It was a forensic science weekly kind of forensic
Mm.
science news and commentary.
Wow, that's really cool. And so you do one episode a week,
I used to, yeah.
and how long was it?
I did that for about a year and a half, 2 years. And then I just got busy and kind of moved on to other projects. Currently, in development of a kind of a new video-based podcast project right now that
Cool.
yeah, it's a
That's
fun
very
creative
exciting.
outlet.
Yeah. Do you feel that you've always had that kind of need for some kind of creative outlet?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I very much because of what I do and how I don't know how sucked into my work I can get. It's very difficult to try and maintain that sense of self. So I've always kind of sought some kind of creative outlet, whether it was writing or video or podcast or something like that. Right
Yeah.
now, I kind of multitask all that creative outlet across a few different spectrums.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So tell me a little about yourself. So so you said that you don't you're yeah that you the nature of your work is so busy that you often have you need to make time for yourself. What do you do? What's so busy?
Yeah, so my name is Zack Kowalske. I am a detective with a Metro Atlanta Police Department. I specialize in crime scene investigations. I'm assigned to our crime lab. I've been there for a little over 16 and a half years. And I specialize in crime scene reconstruction. So anything dealing with violent crimes, bloodstain pattern analysis, shooting reconstruction, kind of advanced crime scene analysis work. Um, Predominantly, I'm in our crime scene investigations unit, so I'll go out the scenes that I'm requested to, and try and use science to catch bad guys. And then
Awesome. So did you go into this from a law enforcement perspective or a science perspective or both?
a little bit of both. So I knew that I wanted to go into crime scene investigations from about the age of 12. I got my first fingerprint kit under the Christmas tree, I think that year.
Cool.
Yeah, a note
What
to
does a
all
12-year
the
old do with the Christmas tree? Wait, what does the 12-year-old do with the fingerprint kit?
destroy the bathroom counters with fluorescent powder,
I
unknowingly.
gotcha.
So, always do any kind of fingerprinting work outside, because you will stain the countertops.
How does
But
it
yeah,
work? How does that
so
work?
fingerprint powder.
Hmm?
So fingerprint powder is a finely ground up, typically volcanic ash for our black ones. Um, the fingerprint powder comes in a variety of different colors, and because the whole idea is that you want to apply some powder to the sebaceous oils of fingerprints so that you can increase contrast with your medium that your prints are on, right? So
I see.
if we have a white background like a painted wall, we want to use some black powder so that we can develop that print to where we can visualize it, and then we can take photographs of it and lift it and recover it that way. So
And when you get a print, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But
no, it's all
when
good.
you get a print, the shape of like the actual physical shape of the print is what you're going to use to match with someone's DNA, or you wait for the DNA on the print. Like
So
when you get a
there.
print, yeah.
Yeah, so with prints, there are a couple of different routes that you can take, right? So the first is that we can identify who that fingerprint belongs to if we have sufficient ridge characteristics.
Okay.
That can be based off of, just depends on what kind of surface it's on and, how that print is deposited. So
Does
we
that
can
frequently
identify
happen?
the pattern. I'm sorry?
Does that frequently happen?
Oh, yeah.
You could
Oh,
like
yeah.
it's pretty it's not so hard to find, like it's not so hard to get a print with ridges.
No, no, not at all. It
Okay.
is whether or not there is sufficient ridges to actually be able to ID it, right? Because if you think about how you touch, how you interact with the world around you, your hands and your fingers are constantly in motion. So you always think, well, I touch a doorknob, I can absolutely get a fingerprint off of that. Well, what's your hand doing when you touch that doorknob? Well, typically you're
Mm,
twisting the doorknob, right? So that is inherently distorting those ridge characteristics. So it's not guaranteed that we're going to get a fingerprint, a quality fingerprint, I should say.
yeah.
Now, what we can do is we can swab that print, right? And we can swab that and try and go after what's called low count DNA or trace DNA,
Hmm.
and try and go about identifying the source that way.
Wow. Amazing. That's cool.
Yeah, forensic science is awesome. I mean, we're looking for the absolute tiniest of uh, evidence to either identify a source or figure out the series of actions that occurred within a scene.
Yeah. Awesome. So you're 12 years old. You get this kit. You start playing with it. You ruin you ruin your counters, and and then what's the next step? Are you always a sciencey kind of guy? Is that the way your brain works?
Yeah, so I grew up loving science and nature. Uh, I had these Audubon books that I would go out into the woods. I grew up on a bunch of wooded area in
Oh,
Georgia,
beautiful.
north of Atlanta, and we had a creek. So I would go down to the creek and I would catch salamanders and crawdads, and I would use my Audubon books to try and identify the species. Um,
Wow.
and I loved Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. I would go around the woods dressed in khaki, thinking I was the crocodile hunter. And so that was at an early age. I was very much inspired by the natural world around me.
Mhm.
And so when I was in the eighth grade, I had a science teacher, Marcy Kogar. Marcy, if you're listening to this, hello. Thank you so much for literally changing my life.
You need
And
good teachers.
we absolutely need good teachers because a good teacher can have an influence and an impact on the world that they might never know. So Marcy Kogar had been going back to school while she was a teacher to get her master's in forensic chemistry. And she was my eighth grade science teacher, and she had a textbook, one of the forensic chemistry textbooks with her in class, and I had been looking at it and I became fascinated about it. And she said, she kind of encouraged me about it. And so I started reading everything I possibly could get my hands on that dealt with forensic
Wow.
science, and I was absolutely infatuated. Um, so, fingerprint kit under the Christmas tree, and then within the next year, I was fascinated by bloodstain pattern analysis by understanding that we could use physics and mathematics to understand how violence occurs, and using science to understand that violence. So, I mean, in
It
the
sounds like the
ninth
coolest thing in the entire world.
it really did. And so, I'm in the ninth. I have a very distinct memory of my ninth grade science class, and I was doing a project to show my class how bloodstain pattern analysis worked. And I went to a small little private school. I look back at what I'm about to tell you today, and this could never happen in today's kind of school settings that we have. But I
Yeah.
remember having this pumpkin that I had rigged up with aquarium tubing and a pump so that I could circulate my fake blood.
Uh-huh.
And then I brought this as the neck. And so then I brought this into class and I took a kitchen knife and I cut the neck and I showed
Oh my
how the
God.
pumping, and I was making blood stains, in front of a ninth grade science class. So
What
you
did your teacher say? Did your
could,
teacher love it?
they loved it. Absolutely loved it.
I bet they did, by the way, because that's creative. It's such a fun like that. Those are the kind of assignments we need to encourage. I feel like.
Yeah, I never had a bad teacher in high school or middle school for that. I was always blessed with great teachers who really encouraged me and just let me kind of thrive, beat my own weird little drum. And really the same thing for my mom. My mom is absolutely the reason that I am where I am today is because she was so encouraging of everything that I got into. We turned we had a detached garage that had been converted into an apartment. And
Mhm.
my older brother lived up top, and we turned the lower level into my own little crime lab.
No
So
way.
yeah, yeah.
How old are
So
you?
at that point, I'm 12, 13.
So
Uh,
they really leaned into it. You all
oh yeah,
really leaned into it.
100%. I really leaned into it and was
Do you have family in law
encouraged.
enforcement?
No, no.
Just you.
Yeah, my grandfather Bucky, he went into civil defense in the 50s,
Okay.
after he finished World War II. But
Hmm.
no, I'm of my immediate family, I'm the only one that decided to go into
Cool,
law
cool,
enforcement.
cool. But they gave you that. By the way, that space is not it's not so. Speaking as a teacher and as an older brother and as now a parent, that space is not easy to give a kid. Like I know it's like people talk about it a lot, but I feel like human nature is to want, especially like if you're a parent, you want your kid to kind of live the life either that you feel like you lived well or live the life that you didn't live better, and like
Sure.
a parent will typically like, have an idea, like an outline for the kid what their life is, and if that kid wants to deviate, parents, it's hard. You don't know what to do with that, and so I give a ton of props and credit to people that are willing to give other people the space to be themselves and not trample on them.
Oh, that was absolutely 100% my mom.
That's awesome. It's so
And
beautiful.
yeah, I will for always. And I've tried, I'm a parent myself. My daughter just graduated high school last week.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Now I just
That's
gotta get her
crazy.
through, just gotta get her through college. But that was definitely one of the biggest growing pains and learning points for myself as a parent was that our kids are not us. So understanding that my learning style and my kind of viewpoint on education is very different from my daughter's.
Yeah.
I'm I did my I did my undergrad in investigative forensics, my master's in forensic science, and I'm a PhD researcher in forensic science out of Staffordshire University. So education is very much a key focus point for me.
Yeah.
Personal education. My daughter's not that way. She's super excited to be going to marine sciences down at the college that she's going to go off to. She wants to go be a shark researcher. And hey, if that's what you want to do, go. I will encourage you every different way that I can, because that was ultimately what I kind of had to learn was that our kids are going to find their own way, and it is your job as a parent to just encourage them and to support
But
them.
to just to I'm sorry, hop in real quick. I know I mentioned this on the phone recently, but I just saw that the place I was mentioning to you, the dolphin therapy place that I sold medical equipment to, is looking for interns for the I
That's
think
awesome.
coming up. So I'll send you their information after if you would like for your daughter
Yeah,
because anything
absolutely.
to get started is such a phenomenal way to do it.
That was down in the
And
Keys, right?
it's well, yeah, but it's the closest key. It's Key Largo, so it's
Oh,
the
well, hell,
closest
maybe I
key.
want to
So,
go be an intern.
by the way, you know what? I think it's funny because we live in a time, especially with remote work, and I mean, I know that your schedule at this particular moment is crazy, but I think that for a lot of people, there's a lot more time and opportunity to kind of chase these crazy dreams down today than there's ever been before. You
Oh,
know? Um,
100%.
yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
No, I
I
mean, I completely agree. But I am by far, I'm a victim of my own uh, eccentricities. Apart from my full-time detective work, I also run a private practice firm where I run an expert witness firm. So I do private casework for both prosecution and defense, doing crime scene reconstruction, shooting reconstruction, all that kind of stuff. And that is pretty much a full-time job all on its own of running a company. And then the PhD thing and all these other little
So
projects I find
how do
myself.
you balance your time? What's your typical? Do you have a typical day, or do you just is every week something else?
Um, yeah, so I kind of divide one, I live and die by my calendar. I kind of plan my days out down to like the half hour blocks because I have to.
Yeah.
So at the police department, I work typically Tuesday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. So I work 4 10s. And then I'm on call on off hours. My partner and I split on call status. So, somebody has to be available at 3 a.m. to respond to, something.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that works. And I'll kind of go into what an average day there looks like. Saturday, Sunday, Monday are devoted to my private casework in the company. Um, and that can be as short as 3 hours a day or as deep as 12 to 14 hours a day. It just really depends on the requirements of the company at that point and my caseload volume. I stay really freaking busy with it, which is a good thing. I'm by no means complaining. I absolutely love what I do.
It
Once
sounds like
again,
you wouldn't do all this if you didn't love it, you
no,
know.
absolutely not. And then with the PhD work, I kind of sprinkle it in throughout. I'm in the final phases. I've just provided my first draft of my dissertation. So I've got my revision notes. Got to do some revision work over the next month, month and a half, and then I'll submit it and be done with it.
Is there
Um,
maximum amount of time that you have to take to do a PhD, or can you take as much time as you want and sprinkle it over X amount of years?
no, there is a minimum and maximum registration period. So it
Okay.
depends on if you're full-time or part-time. So I'm a part-time researcher. So the minimum registration period is 5 years, which is I'm at.
Right.
And then the maximum registration period, I want to say is 10 years. It might be
Right.
7 though. I think it's 10. If you're full-time, typically what you see is a minimum registration period of about 3 years with a maximum registration between 7 to 10.
Right. And I guess that's depending on how heavy your dissertation is going to be.
Correct.
Right, right, right. That's really interesting because one of the things, I mean, I've been thinking, I'm always thinking a little bit about going back to school because if, excuse me, for no other reason other than teaching, I love teaching and I would love an opportunity to teach college students. And, it's almost impossible these days to get a job teaching in college without a PhD.
It
And
is, you
so,
know, the PhD thing has been it has really been the biggest challenge for me. Not just in terms of conducting the actual research itself, but you truly become a subject matter expert when you do a PhD. If you have ever had imposter syndrome, I highly recommend you do a PhD because you'll come out on the other end. Um, being an expert in your field. And
so what
if
do you
you do
stu-
it,
what's your PhD focusing on? What are you going to be defending?
yeah. So bloodstain pattern analysis. My dissertation research specifically has been in how environmental variables influence our accuracy of measurement, and that is across multiple different surface types. So, how does surface roughness, porosity, and other environmental variables kind of affect the overall stain shape and size. And then there's also a contingent, which was the most novel research component, and this is where it got a lot of traction. I just did an interview with BBC a couple weeks ago on it. I did astroforensics, I guess is kind of what I'm calling it. So it
Astro?
was astro, yeah, as in
Sure.
space. So
Yeah.
it was the first space forensics research. So took
No
my
way. Let's go. That's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah, it's super cool. And the story behind it is super neat, right? So, what we ended up doing was taking the same study that we were doing here on Earth, and doing that in a zero gravity environment. And so, how this all started, this is a super just
I want to hear it. This
bizarre,
sounds
yeah,
incredible. Yeah, let's hear
it's a
it.
bizarre series of events. So years ago. I had gone to my advisor and I said, "Hey, so backstory. I'm a huge space nerd. If you didn't
Yeah?
already notice, I love anything science,
Oh
but
man, we're gonna have so much fun talking about this. Okay,
I
yeah.
really love space science, right? So I'd gone to my advisor and I said, "Hey, I'd like to do a thought experiment as the last chapter of the research that takes it into a space environment and how bloodstain pattern analysis will be influenced by that space environment." Because here on Earth, gravity is incredibly pervasive. It is always with us. It influences everything that we examine. So when you remove that gravity, how do fluid dynamics affect blood and blood stain patterns? I said, so I'd like to do it as a thought experiment, and what that just meant is I would do a pretty exhaustive literature review of studies that are dealing with fluid dynamics and space medicine already, and then I would apply those concepts to a thought experiment of how bloodstain power analysis would work. So as part of that, I'd reached out to a friend of mine who had a colleague at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, JPL,
Cool.
and she put me in touch with her. I was like, "Hey, I'm looking for any kind of research studies or video that I could get my hands on of fluid dynamic studies on the ISS." And so she put me in touch with somebody who put me in touch, and I go down
It's so
this.
nice that people are willing to do that, by the way, isn't it?
It's fantastic when you tell somebody just kind of like, "Hey, this is what I'm looking for." It never hurts to cold email somebody, because what's the
Case in
worst they can
point,
tell?
right?
The worst they can tell you is no.
Yeah.
In which case, you're exactly where you are right now. You have
Correct.
nothing but advantage to gain.
Yes.
So, you know, be willing to
Put yourself
be
out there.
willing, yeah,
Yeah.
be willing to put yourself out there. Because what ended up happening was I got a hold of a study that was on hemorrhaging in space, right? So bleeding in space and how to hemorrhage control, by a guy
That's
named Dr.
interesting
Yeah, fascinating.
because I
Um,
bet because there's no gravity, right? How's the hemorrhage going to rupture? I guess or or like how's it gonna
yeah.
spread? You know, like what's gonna happen? It's crazy.
Yeah, so basically, so if you don't know, when you cut yourself in space and you start bleeding, there is no gravitational pull, right? So what happens is the fluid just accumulates in kind of this mass. It's called a fluid dome around that injury site. So like as you move, the mass is going to kind of move with it,
Like a
right?
bubble.
It kind of looks like Jello, right? It's
Ah,
like
that's so
if
weird.
you think of like a bowl of Jello, and how
It's
that
stuck to you though.
jiggle. Yeah, but it's around the injury site.
Right. So let's say I have a cut on my hand, right? And then the blood would kind of just.
It just ooze out and it would just stay together because of surface tension.
Oh,
So
so
until you have
interesting.
a sufficient force, like until you move your hand quick enough and you create what's called a shear force, that
Yeah.
shear force is what's going to detach the liquid from your
Wow.
hand.
Wow.
So I had read George's paper on it, and so I emailed him. I said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. I would love if you have any video that you'd be willing to let me look at, so I can kind of extrapolate some concepts."
Mm-hmm.
Well, he replied back and he said, "That sounds absolutely fascinating. I am actually going to be driving down to Kennedy Space Center next month for my next research flight. Would you like to meet for coffee while I pass through Atlanta?"
Nice.
Abso-freaking-lutely, I would like to meet you for coffee. So George and I met at a coffee shop that was just off the highway, not too far from where I live, and we proceeded to spend 2 hours talking about all things space medicine and my research, and just it was he was a great sounding board. And towards the end of the conversation, he asked me a phenomenal question that has forever changed my life. If you could do this research in zero gravity, how would you do your research? And so that's such a phenomenal question because it forces you to do two things. One, this type of research is incredibly expensive. So any kind of microgravity research, a parabolic flight arc. So if you have ever heard the term the vomit comet, it's a plane that does a series of parabolic flights, and so it induces gravity. For researchers, that runs about 40 grand.
Okay.
Um, to put anything actually up into the ISS, you're talking about millions of dollars because weight matters. So you're in confined environments. So when you're asked the question of how would you do your research, you have to boil your research down to the simplest investigative question.
I see.
What are we actually looking at,
Right.
right? And how can we do it in the simplest terms? Um, so on the back of a Starbucks napkin, I kind of sketched out what I was thinking, and he said, "Well, I tell you what, if I have any extra time, if you want to ship me a couple materials and I have some extra time, I'll see if I can't do it."
Wow.
And so that was December of 2021 that he did that flight, and unfortunately, he didn't have any extra time. His real research, his
That's what. Yeah.
research that NASA was actually paying for took priority, and so it didn't happen. But he did another series of flights in May of the following year. So 6 months later, and he calls me and says, "Zach, I had time, and I was able to get two tests out of it." And
Wait,
so
when did he call you? How many years later?
6 months later, so
Oh,
in
6 months
May,
later. Gotcha.
yep,
Yeah. Okay.
so
Yeah.
in May of 22. Um, and so We've been able to do two tests, which gave me just enough data to kind of work with, and from there I was able to actually make a study out of it. And so
That's really cool.
that published last year in Forensic Science International. I highly recommend anybody that's interested in it, check it out.
Send me a
It's
couple of
open.
links, by the way, to put in the show note caption of the stuff that
Yeah,
you've done, and
yeah,
so that you
absolutely.
could. And now I want to read them myself.
Yeah, what I wasn't expecting was the kind of the media storm that ended up starting. So I have since went on Fox News, BBC, and
Wow.
a variety of other New York Post did a comment on it. So it was pretty cool to get some actual. Um,
Is that surreal? Like when that initially starts rolling in, do you think it's like a prank at first? You're like, like what is this? Or how did that feel?
yeah, it was definitely surreal, but gratifying. You're when you're doing novel research like astroforensics, people call you crazy.
Yeah, well,
yeah, it
it's
was
gonna
very
be a
much,
problem eventually. You might as well start now, right?
that was the whole thought, right? Is, when you're doing something that is so far outside the spectrum, uh, it most people make fun of it because it sounds crazy, but I'm going to tell you a little secret of how I try and live my life. Um, in order to be exceptional, you have to be the exception,
Yeah,
right? So I've never really worried about what people thought of my research or thought of my work.
brilliant.
I love what I do, and if you can have that level of self-confidence, um, you know, then
Yeah,
yeah, go for
yeah.
it. It was difficult getting it published because of that. So I wrote up the study, and I initially had submitted it to Journal of Forensic Science, and Journal of Forensic Science had said that it was. The astroforensics was immature in its study, and that maybe in a few years, as it developed, what they'd consider it and whatnot. To which, I laughed at the response and the denial because I'm pretty sure that's what they said to Galileo.
Yeah,
Not calling myself Galileo. Wow, that's a
yeah. I
flex.
understand. Yeah, but
Um,
I think we
but
all
but
understand what you're trying to say.
but yeah, it is, it, it's novel for a reason, right? Novel literally means new research.
Yeah,
So then I pitched it to Science and Justice out of the UK, another journal. They kind of had the same responses that it was a little,
nascent.
it did, a little
Yeah,
nascent, didn't really kind of fit with contemporary research. And then I pitched it to Forensic Science International, and they loved it.
there you go.
And so, don't I, I've been told no a lot in my life of different ideas, and
No is
you know,
just a word.
no, it's just a word. You got to keep plugging away. I work cold cases a lot, and in my cold case investigations,
What's a cold
the
case? Sorry.
so a cold case is any kind of typically it's a homicide or you can have violent crimes, but so I work cold case homicides. And so cold case homicides are murder investigations where all leads have been exhausted. They're typically old cases, so they can be 20, 30 years old that you're still trying to solve.
Wow.
Um, so in the only way that you solve a 30-year-old murder is by having dogged determination.
Yeah.
You're going to get lab results that don't help you. You're going to get negative results, and you have to have the tenacity to be able to go, okay, that lab test didn't work for us to produce a positive lead. What's the next one?
Right.
Right? What's our next piece of evidence that we can try and re-examine? What's our next lead that we can try and follow? What's the next interview that we can try and go conduct to try and get that one piece of information that is going to change everything?
Yeah. Yeah.
So being willing to accept and disregard no is a superpower.
So you probably. So I mean, it's interesting. You think you learned that from work, or you think that's what made you good at work, and you knew that already,
Oh, I
or
have
both?
no idea. That's a chicken and egg kind of
I know,
question.
right? But there's certain things that people know. Like I know that, for example, I have a very, similar experiences where I've been told no a lot. That I've had to like go alternative routes to try to get the yes, right? And
I think that is probably a personal trait. That is probably something that I bring to work. I grew up. kind of a socially awkward kid.
Mm.
I didn't have a whole lot of friends because I was this weird little eccentric kid, right? But the friend group I had, we were a small little friend group, and that was, and we're still all best friends today, 30 years later.
That's
Um,
amazing.
oh yeah, yeah. True friendship is one of the best blessings that we can have in life. Um, so shout out to my crew. Um, where I was going with that is chicken before the egg, right?
Yeah, in terms of not being, in terms of not just taking a no and like kind of
Yeah,
figuring things out, because you need to do that with the science journals. You need to do that with work. You need to do that with, like just
I
even
think
ways
that's a
people
learn,
research.
probably a learned thing. I don't know where I got it from.
Yeah, I think a
There
lot of,
is,
because I think for a lot of people, the difference between success and failure is who's able to just last another day, just like one more
oh,
day. Like,
100. So it's funny you say one more day. Harrison Ford has an amazing quote that I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but that's the summary of it is that consistency is success, right? Is if you can tell yourself one more day. Right. And so when I started my most recent kind of YouTube channel, a creative endeavor, that was what I told myself. I said, you just gotta make it one more day.
yeah,
You just gotta shoot one more episode. Just
yeah,
shoot,
just
write
keep
one
going.
more script and just keep going. And that was a lot of fun for me. That was the creative outlet that I needed. And, life kind of evolves you and changes, right? So I started kind of my private company started picking up, so I didn't have as much time to shoot, and so you kind of figure out how you evolve through that. For me, it kind of shifted into writing Substack articles, and I'm
I
kind
saw
of
that.
found,
Those,
yeah,
but I read a couple of them. I read a couple of them earlier. They're a lot of fun. I wanted to actually ask you about them. We'll get back to them. But they're really cool. I like them a lot.
yeah. Well,
Uh,
thank you. Yeah, I've always loved writing, and that was kind of what at that point the Science Detective. That's the YouTube series that I started last year, year before. Um, I wanted to bring forensic science topics and concepts uh, to an audience, right? And communicate those science ideas. And I prefer video. I prefer a visual medium because this is, it's really difficult for me to
totally.
explain a bloodstain pattern to you when I can just show you a really cool bloodstain pattern. And same thing with like, thinking of those concepts in microgravity. Um, but it's also, so that evolves, kind of
Yeah,
ran out of time for because I had to, actually do real casework.
yeah.
And so that's where I kind of shifted gears and turned it into a writing outlet. And I enjoy that, I'll bounce back and forth, the theme and the concept of the science detective more than anything is what is consistent.
Yes, of
Um,
course. I've
so
noticed
yeah,
that. It's a lot of fun, by the way. It's really, really
no,
cool.
thank you.
It's really, really cool because it's fun to see, because when someone has a passion and it like they become an embodiment of a combination of their own like personality and twist and that passion, and like that like presents it in a whole, it's one of the most magical experiences I think that people love, and I think that with enough time and effort getting out there, like the quality is going to be there if you're authentic, because you're authentic about it,
Absolutely.
but you can't fake authenticity and passion. You can't fake that kind of stuff. So when you read it and like you see all the work you're doing, I'm like, this guy loves, what he does, like you can detect that immediately.
Yeah, my biggest problem is I have too many hands on too many different projects right now.
Oh yeah.
Uh, you know, my therapist asked me several months ago. She's like, "What happens if you don't do them all at the same time?" I was like, "I don't know. My head explodes." But it was such a great question that challenged me at that kind of season in my life. Um, was to really try and focus on once again getting back to basic principles of what is the most important project right now. Let's get that done so that I can kind of compound interest my time, and
Yes.
move on to other ones, right? So like I've got three different books I'm working on that are all at different phases. And it's like trying to make three different dinners at the same time. right?
Hmm.
You're going to make a crappy dinner across all three of them.
Oh
Whereas
yes.
if you just pick one project, n- devote everything into it, and then kind of go from there. I kind of equate the idea, if you've ever heard of the snowball technique with like paying down debts and stuff like that, is you devote all your financial resources to
To
one
one that,
project.
right?
Yep, and then you snowball it to the next one.
Yeah.
Same thing with your time is, if you can focus everything on one project, or endeavor or whatever, um, then you kind of compound from there.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's just, again, it's just a matter of the discipline of doing it. I said this yesterday, and I said this today, and I'll say it again tomorrow. I think that that in 5 years and 10 years from now, or even 15 years from now, the difference between what's going to make people successful or not is their ability to be autonomous and disciplined. And I think that,
Yeah.
like what you do is like the way that you reach out to people, try to make something happen, make a connection. Do you know anyone else that would be able to help me move that on to the next person? Like, we have information. Information is more easily achievable than ever, but connections and discipline are actually what we're going to need to actually turn that information to something tangible. You know,
Oh, absolutely. In being in in law enforcement and that forensic community for more than 16 and a half years at this point, um, if I run across a problem, on a scene or dealing with some kind of analysis or some kind of hairball thing that I'm thinking of, if I don't know the answer, I can probably get to the answer within two phone calls.
yes,
Is I'll know somebody that I can call who will know somebody who knows the answer, right?
yes,
And that's a lot of times you run into when you're trying to solve difficult cases, like we'll go back to cold case homicides, they're cold for a reason, right? Is
yeah,
you have exhausted all available analytical testing at that point. So you have to think outside the box on being able to obtain that that partial DNA profile or whatever it is, because all the investigators that have touched that case before you didn't think of that. Right.
correct,
Or the science and technology didn't exist at the time, right?
correct.
So that's one of the big things now is we look at cases that we're working cold cases. We're like, can we apply any advanced DNA analysis to this case, right? So when you start kind of getting on the fringe of what modern day forensic science can do, I'll give you a good example. Had a case where I had a surface that is incredibly abnormal. I won't kind of say what that surface is just because it still is an active investigation. Um, but it's a really abnormal surface that you would never process for DNA today. Um,
As in, like, you
and
wouldn't
I
think to look there.
Yeah, it pushes the limits of what our capability is. You're talking about such a low level of DNA that may
You wouldn't think
possibly
so,
be.
right?
Yeah, you
Right,
just
right,
wouldn't.
okay,
Most labs aren't going to try it.
right.
Um, but I had an idea of how we could do it. And so I called my main state crime lab. I said, "Hey, is this something you can do? Is this something that we can do in doing it through this process?" And they said, "No, that's not possible. It falls outside of their validation protocols. Excuse, excuse, excuse." So then I contacted a good colleague of mine. He runs a private crime lab shop out of California. Um, and he's kind of my sounding board when I have crazy snowball, crazy harebrained ideas. And I called him and I said, "Hey, I've got this type of evidence and I want to get DNA off of it. And here's how I'm thinking we can do it. Um, is that something we can try?" And what I love about him is he'll always say, "Doesn't hurt to try," because he's going to charge me for it, right? So I mean, he's got, once again, you have nothing but advantage. There's only upside.
You learn one
If
way or
at
the other.
most, yeah, if at most it fails to be able to develop a suitable profile or any kind of partial profile, then you're exactly in the same place that you were already. So I sent this item out to him, and it worked.
It's
Right? Is
amazing.
we ended up generating something off of it that everyone else said that you couldn't do. Um, so that once again comes back to being able to be not just tenacious but innovative thinking,
Yeah,
being able to
amazing.
think, yeah, being able to think outside the box, um, and just don't care what people think, man. Yeah,
You know what you
that.
should have you ever thought about heading out? I know this. I mean, I'm only gonna saying this because I'm super super interested in this whole like era and time period and top and like everything about it. But you should head out to California to like L.A. To like where like the whole Manson family was, and like there's a lot of deaths apparently that were associated with the family that were never actually closed up cases because they didn't have the evidence. Can you hear me all right, by the way?
Oh yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay, yeah. And so there's a great book called Chaos. I don't know if you ever heard of it or read it, by a guy named Tom O'Neill. And he started he's an investigative journalist, and he started by writing a piece for the 30-year anniversary for the Manson murders in the '95, and he was supposed to write a news article, and it turned into a 20-year project, and he wrote this enormous book, not enormous but incredible book that's just so detail rich about Manson, all the potential directions that were associated with him, and he doesn't have any kind of he's missing evidence. He's missing a lot of
Sure.
either evidence or files and stuff like that. There's a lot of like
That's what
unsolved
that's one of
crimes in that
the
whole area.
that's one of the most difficult things about working cold cases is over years, over decades, evidence gets lost, evidence deteriorates, evidence gets accidentally destroyed,
Or people are late, or the technology has not been updated, and people haven't gone back to look at it again.
yeah.
It's really interesting. I mean, do you ever work with investigative journalists and stuff like that to kind of try to figure out, like,
Not within my government casework. Just, I mean, there's a pretty hard line there between being able to talk about criminal investigations with media. Um, but
or what
I
about
have
what if
re
someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, I have this story I'm working on. I need help finding some evidence, in terms of X, Y, and Z, evidence, murder, DNA, or whatever."
Yeah, so as long as it's not a conflict with my current casework, so as long as it's not,
Cool.
by
So
anybody that I
yeah.
represent. I recently did that for a documentary series of a pretty infamous case, cold case from the 60s here in Atlanta. And so I just did
Cool.
a
Which
piece
one?
with them. I'm not going to say just because that documentary series is currently in production.
Oh, okay, fine.
So.
Let me know when it comes out,
Yeah,
though.
yeah, it'll be it should be airing in October. Um,
That's exciting. I need to set a
and that's
reminder.
super exciting. But it was the same thing. It was a private investigator and an investigative journalist who were shooting this, and they were deep diving into this case, and they had reached out to me because of we had just closed a cold case with my agency, and they wanted my opinion and thoughts
Yeah.
on this particular case, and so that was it was a neat opportunity and fascinating look into this case from the 60s.
Cool. So I'm excited to hear. I'm excited to find out about it. I'm really excited because I love that whole era. I love like '60s America. To me, is one of the most fascinating points in time ever.
I very much feel the same about the 50s and 60s, right? Is that
Yeah.
whole concept of retrofuturism
Yes.
is I think I may have been born in the wrong era.
You know what?
So
I feel the same way, but I actually think that for people like us that feel like we were born in the wrong era, we were probably meant to just carry over the spirit of that era into this one. Because
actually, and maybe that's what it is, right? Is maybe it's the spirit that well, apart from the architectural and like just like the beautiful design concepts of that era, um, but you have this post World War II excitement and enthusiasm and this innovation that
the
really,
creativity, explosion of creativity.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and I don't know, to me, I look at that and it just seems a little different from our current techno whatever it is that we're currently in. I would love to see a blending of the two. I'd love to see that kind of those same design concepts
I think
and
that's coming up. I think that's
yeah,
coming up. I hope.
think so.
And yeah, the reason why I think that is because I think that the '50s and '60s were kind of a relatively similar in the sense that there was a streak of anti-authoritarianism that kind of was driving the underlying motivation, like a rejection of that whole militaristic World War II tough parents kind of culture where you're supposed to live a straight, proper life, and a lot of people, wanted to pursue their own thing, and and at that time, trust in institutions had collapsed, or in many many ways, and I think that we're experiencing a similar thing where we have all the technology and intelligence and creativity, and in the last couple of years, there has been a lack of trust in institutions, and almost like a scrambling to try to reestablish like what's going, who's going to emerge as like the new trusted, creative, intelligent, honest, authoritative perspective, and everyone's kind of scrambling for it at one time. It's really really interesting, and I think that's also gonna lead to creative and cultural blossoming, I hope.
I agree. We're at this unique point as a society where you have such a hard division of political ideologies and societal ideologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is everyone has a very firm opinion on how our society should look and be shaped and be run. Uh, and that happens to be meeting at a time point when we're also at this technological revolution with,
Groundbreaking,
yeah,
groundbreaking.
with
Every day
artif
is just another.
every, oh, it's fascinating. It's I love being in the future. I can't wait for my flying car. Um, but you have these all these roads that are starting to merge at the same point, right? And I have no idea what the next 2 or 3 years are going to look like, right?
I'm excited though. I don't know, but
I choose
I'm
to, yeah,
excited.
just like Doctor Who, I choose to be an eternal optimist. Regardless of who you voted for or
Yeah,
what you think of our political parties, at the ground level of our society, I choose to see the good,
I
which
agree.
is very difficult to do in my career. But yeah,
How do you keep that up? How do you maintain that?
oh,
Is it just like you just choose to kind of see the goodness that you put out into the world and you see it kind of come back to you?
I think so. You know, I I have been I've investigated tons of really just horrific scenes over the years that you know do leave some mental scars. I'll be the first one to tell you that I was involved in a shooting pretty early on in my career, and then that was followed by working lots of uh, horrific child murders and stuff like that. That had a ultimate impact on like post-traumatic stress and PTSD and all that kind of stuff. So it took me several years to try and understand how that kind of my personal outlook was and how it evolved and developed. For me, I nowadays I work things very academically, very clinically, is the best way to try and describe that.
Hmm.
Um, so when I go and work, a terrible scene, it's just a scene to me. I'm very much or not disembodied, but
Disassociated.
disassociate from the emotional context of that scene.
Okay, so can we talk about that a little bit? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did want to get to this. It is one of the many topics that I wanted to get to, but yeah, the what some things that you've experienced, I guess, earlier in your career, things that help shape you. How do um, how do people doing public service, you know, carry the weight of the responsibility that you carry, and what do you do to deal with it and stuff like that? And I would love for you, honestly, I don't care what direction you go. I just want to hear what you think about all that. So take it away, please.
Yeah, when I first started in law enforcement, mental
What's
health was
Atlanta
not.
like? Sorry, in terms of law enforcement, in terms of like, what do you typically see? What kind of crime do you typically see in Atlanta? Like, I know, for example, certain places are more prone. You see drugs more often, or some places are more geared towards prostitution or
Oh, I
violent crime.
mean, you have it all in Atlanta. You have everything from violent crime to human trafficking to drugs. I mean, I work for an agency that is in the Metro Atlanta area, so I don't work
Oh,
for Atlanta proper.
I see.
But it's the same concept, right? Is it just kind of spreads out. So you have very much a diverse selection of crime types.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, when I first started in law enforcement, we you didn't really talk about mental health. I very much came up under a man up and kind of toughen it out, and you just don't talk about it. You just move on to your next assignment, your next tasking that you got to handle, and that slowly evolved and changed over my career. Thank God for the better. Law enforcement, or public safety in general, so law enforcement, firefighters, communications and corrections have an incredibly high suicide rate. Last year, more cops committed suicide than were killed in the line of duty.
No
Um,
way.
yeah, so we are more likely to die by our own hands than by a bad guy. And that's
It's terrible.
because oh, it's absolutely horrendous. Um, Thankfully, within the past 10 years, that has very much made a shift. You know, the concept of destigmatizing mental health was a big thing with that. Normalizing the conversation about mental health, going out to, it's very difficult to try and discuss and talk about some of the scenes that we go to with somebody who has no context or understanding of it, right? I can't really tell you what digging up with your hands a murdered 4-year-old feels like, or
But
like,
that's stuff that that you guys have to deal with.
yeah, I can very much think of the day before Christmas of 2013 where that was what I was doing, is
Fuck.
having to uh, uh, dig up a fresh shallow grave of a child, and that
You
is
have to, and you take
horrific.
that whole you take that with you forever. No, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that was what, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, something like that. And I can still very much see the fog of the woods that I was in, and I can go right back to it. Over time dulls it, right?
hmm
But it's a compounding thing, right? Because then you're moving on to your next case.
yeah,
Ultimately, that all caught up with me. So how do you deal with it? It's kind of dependent upon the individual everyone handles it differently, right? If you handle it in a really positive light, you're probably working out and exercising, because exercise is incredibly helpful for mental health.
yeah.
You're
Do
prioritizing
you work out a
eating
lot?
right. I try, I try to. Once again, we come back to time. I try and
Yes.
work out at least 2 to 3 times a week.
Okay,
That has definitely not been the case over the past month and a half, because my basement has been under a remodel, so I haven't had. Um, that's been my excuse, is what that is.
I gotcha.
Um,
Sounds like a good one.
yeah, yeah, I think so. Uh, so, that's a healthy way of doing it, finding those positive, healthy outlets with your family, stuff like that. Because then there's the negative outlet, right? There is, alcohol.
Alcoholism.
Yep, alcoholism, substance abuse, those really negative behaviors that can increase risk, right? So buying, really crazy things, and gambling and all those different vices can be so easy because it's giving us that dopamine hit, right? Well, I mean, that's not novel to just law enforcement. Everyone is constantly looking for that dopamine hit to take their mind off of their own individual stresses and problems. My baseline and my stresses and problems are just a little different from your stresses and problems, right? Doesn't mean that we're not both
Yeah,
dealing
sure.
with stresses and problems. It's just yours may be, you had a bad day, and you're under a lot of stress at work, and because you gotta get different expense reports out, or whatever normal the normal person does. My bad day looks way freaking different than that.
Yeah,
So that's the dichotomy there. For me in my career, I went down a really, it crept up on me and I didn't even realize it. Right. So,
because it happens slowly or in small bites.
100%, right? So I was when I was involved in a shooting back in 2013,
What happened?
uh 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 friend of mine at an agency north of us had stopped a car for a license plate violation. As he was walking up to the car, the guy gets out and shoots him 7 times. Uh, by the grace of God, he ends up surviving. And so,
Whoa!
so this guy then flees down south, down the highway, and our agency ends up picking him up. I'm a I'm a, less than 1 month detective, and like any good
Wow.
detective, I was, just leaving dinner, and I end up in this car chase and shooting with this guy who tried killing, a friend of mine tried killing me and a lot, several other officers.
What was his
I was
story? Was he on drugs? Was he part of was he a crime? Was he a gang member? Like, what was his situation?
He was in a mental health crisis. He
He was
was
mental health
basically
crisis.
going out looking for a
Is that a
fight.
lot of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, normal people who aren't having mental health crises don't try and
Shoot
kill
cops.
police officers.
Yeah, but you
Um,
could be an aggressive. Like you could be. You don't have to be having a mental break to be acting violently or aggressively necessarily.
yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
So we end up in, a hellacious gunfight. He ends up getting killed. And thank God Dave survives.
Thank God.
So that was pretty early on. I was 24 years old at the time. That's really young.
So what are you experiencing? So are you? I'm just curious about like I started 2 months ago doing jujitsu, right? Just
Good for
totally.
you.
Thank you very much. It's a lot of fun. It's I get beating the crap out of, right?
Yeah.
and
And getting
and
twisted up into like looking like a pretzel.
oh yeah, and there was 2 or 3 times where, especially, and it's interesting starting this kind of later in my life because it's a totally new experience. My body's not used to any of that. And on the way home from my second class, my whole body. I was driving home. My whole body was shaking, and I was
Yeah.
just going through this massive physical.
Yeah. So
I'm
what's
not sure whether
happening?
it's a trauma or a shock or what, right? But like
So
my
if you've,
hands are shaking. I'm on the wheel, and like I can't. And that's just with a couple of friendly guys that just want to teach me some moves that I happen to be taking falls in the wrong way. Like I can't imagine being a
yeah.
24-year-old and being in this world.
So at that point, your body is undergoing a fight or flight or freeze response. And so now I kind of teach about physiology and neurology of stress and combat stress, right? And so within those first, couple seconds, as soon as you are exposed to a stimulus that you perceive to be advantageous, disadvantaged to your health, such as somebody shooting at you or being twisted up like a pretzel and getting into a fight, your body is going to start dumping hormones, right? So epinephrine, neuroepinephrine gets dumped into the bloodstream, and that is going to kind of start that adrenaline response. So we're going to start experiencing heightened, increased heart rate, increased respiratory rate because we're trying to get more oxygen into our blood for our brain to be able to process these things.
Yeah.
Your blood's going to start kind of getting pulled away from your limbs and towards your core. That's why you
Oh,
start kind
so
of getting those
interesting.
shaking. And then you're gonna have, cortisol being introduced into your bloodstream so they can try and level it out. But yeah, your body undergoes a crazy chain reaction, um, just in terms of blood chemistry, during those kind of responses. Not to mention, the mental health component of after the fact, right? Of anything like post-traumatic stress or anxiety, depression, stuff like that. For me, I had a hard time sleeping after that, in terms of like falling asleep. So I was diagnosed with acute post-traumatic stress as well as pre-insomnia. That's just a really fancy way of saying I had a hard time falling asleep because my brain was going 1,000
Yeah.
miles an hour.
Were you
So,
so? Have you what do you think about the research? There's I guess a good amount of it, although it's not really done too much in the states about PTSD and psychedelics and stuff like that,
oh
and
yeah.
using it to use and like. Do you think that should be something that we look to use for our law enforcement and our and our veterans and the people that and the people that are on the front lines?
Yeah, so I have, I mean, similar to you, I've listened to quite a few podcasts. I think Sean Ryan talks a lot about it on
Oh
his
yeah,
show.
oh yeah.
So he there is definitely
He's
some
a hero for talking about it the way he does. By the way, I think.
100%. Shout out to Sean Ryan. You're you very much normalized the conversation that is needed both in the veteran community and in the public safety community.
Yes,
So I very much admire that about him.
he's a hero. I think.
I think that it definitely merits study, rigorous scientific study in terms of what
Yes.
the long-term effects are. Whether, if you're at that point with post-traumatic stress or cumulative post-traumatic stress, you probably aren't going to be in a duty ready status to where you can. I mean, maybe you can. I don't know. Um,
Like
I
I
think.
can't imagine how much worse is it than the PTSD that keeps law enforcement officers up every night.
So
That that
I
you can't
completely
that you're
agree.
not sleeping. Like how much I mean, and down the line, how much does what we have does the status quo compound, and how much is it, like you said, more deaths by suit by your own hands than in the field.
I'd rather seek interesting and hopefully helpful
Studies.
remedies than alcohol.
Oh yeah,
If DMT is helpful and better than a
and a
fifth of
six pack of
Jack,
course. Yeah,
yeah, you went with Coors, I went with Jack.
yeah.
Mine was Crown Royal. I loved Crown Royal.
Do you still
Yeah.
do you still drink?
No, I quit drinking a couple years ago. I quit drinking, I guess probably 3 or 4 years ago now.
Have you ever
And
looked
and
back?
not because of this. I quit drinking because I wanted to quit smoking. Um, and quitting smoking was by far one of the hardest things that I personally ever did. And so I very much had this association with the two. When I drank, I wanted a cigarette, and so the best discipline I had was it was more.
It's the way healthier outlook. I mean,
Oh
cutting out
yeah,
drinking and smoking in one go is just spectacular
yeah,
for you.
yeah. It very much was. And then I wanted to. That was very much when I really started kind of feeling that I wanted to level up. And Jocko, if you've ever listened
Hmm.
to Jocko, Jocko's podcast, he is adamant about that there is nothing good that comes out of alcohol. And I could not agree with him more about that, having gone through everything I've gone through in my career. That alcohol only, it almost cost me my job. It almost cost me lots of different things because I was trying to medicate this post-traumatic stress and trying to sleep in a really unhealthy way.
Yeah.
Um, so, anyone listening out there, I encourage you to really question, what does alcohol actually bring you?
Yeah.
And if you are honest with yourself, the answer is a sum of zero. Uh, you know,
Well, I
I,
think that
I
it's a little bit more. And by the way, I'm certainly not a heavy advocate of alcohol, period. I do think that for people to have a drink or two as a social lubricant is a
sure, as I said,
it could be like once a week or once every couple of weeks, could be a massive benefit to themselves to help them get over some kind of social hump that they have. I
yep.
think, but physically, but like to use it as a remedy or to use it as a medication is a
Oh,
shit
by no
show.
means. Don't get me wrong. I am not this anti-alcohol purist. If you want to go get, have drinks,
Yeah,
I,
but
I
just think
envy
about
you. I very much miss it. But and I had always told myself that, after I quit smoking and had been clean from smoking for a year, that I can go back to drinking. It's not like I have this like I can't do it. No, it was just a personal choice to
yeah,
where,
yeah, totally.
and the longer that it kind of persisted, the more I was like, hey, I don't need this in my life. Yeah, I
Yeah,
feel a lot better not having it in my life. I haven't, I don't wake up with hangovers or anything like that. So that is helpful. With the using it as a social lubricant, I definitely understand that, right? But then what are you doing there? You're using alcohol to remedy a personal problem. And that is some kind of social anxiety, right?
sure.
Um, so it just, with anybody, I encourage you, understand its place in your life and
Yes.
whether or not it's actually needed, right?
Well put.
Because I can tell you, I have, of at least in my career, I have seen so many um, adverse uh, actions and incidents that alcohol was a contributing factor,
Oh
whether
yeah.
that was a DUI or fatal wrecks or murders, all because alcohol was the inhibitor,
Mhm.
of good choice.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you. And again, I'm not I'm definitely not an advocate for it. I'm definitely not an advocate against it in a healthy way. I happen to know that even for myself, as I became more mature, I realized that alcohol tends to lead me down more immature behaviors and paths that just don't align with the decisions and of interacting that I want to be.
Yep.
The way that I am. Um, but and for example, like you said, I do have social anxiety, and sometimes, and if I'm in a new setting and I'm at a wedding and I haven't met anyone around me, then a drink or two will, get me talking to one person over and say, "What are you up to?" If it's funny because if once you start talking to me, then I'll jump right in. But to make that initial like
It's that
interaction,
icebreaker.
initial hello, yeah, kills
Sure.
me. But do is there a lot of corruption in law enforcement that you've experienced?
No, it's not like what you see on TVs.
No, it's not.
No, no, that is a very, very, very small percentage of what, of law enforcement.
Gotcha. So majority of are you suspicious of people being corrupt or not typically?
Not typically, just because that is so incredibly rare.
Right. Right. And do
Now, that's not to say that it doesn't happen.
sure.
Hell, there was a story a couple weeks ago about an entire small police department out in Alabama that was super corrupt. Um, but once again, that's you're talking about uh, a series of actions and events that are so statistically small compared, it's just like the whole concept of excessive force. If you
Yeah,
look
sure.
at, that became really uh, obviously a highlighted social perspective. Uh, Not just during Ferguson back in 2016, but also with George
2020.
Floyd, back in 2020. I mean, actually, this week is the anniversary,
I
right? The 5-year anniversary of George Floyd, um, and that was a horrific thing. But it brought police excessive police violence into the spotlight, right? And what most people don't realize is that out of the 50 plus million law enforcement citizen encounters a year, that the actual likelihood of it resulting in a sustained allegation of excessive force or police brutality is less than 1,000th of a percent, right? It is something that is so astronomically small.
hmm
Um, you have a higher likelihood of being struck by lightning multiple times.
Really? Then by
Yes.
having that really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow. Wow. I didn't know that. That's amazing to hear.
Yeah.
By the way, I was living in Seattle at the time when the
Oh, I'm
George Floyd
sorry.
riots were happening. Yeah,
I mean, I
and
was
it
living
was
here in Atlanta, and Atlanta was burning because of Rashard Brooks. So,
what was that like? Especially from so I'm sorry. Does First of all, does law enforcement or does I guess doing your public work restrict you in any way from your private work? Or like when you
yes.
told them that you're going, yeah. So when you told them that you want to open your own thing, you open your own shop, what they say?
Yeah, my agreement with my agency is that I just won't work any private cases within the county that I work in, right? Because that would be a conflict of interest. So
Okay,
I
gotcha.
just don't work any private cases within Fulton County, which is the county that Atlanta's in.
Yeah.
But all the surrounding counties, and so in my private casework, I do everything nationally, right? So I've got casework in everything from Georgia to Alaska and Texas and
Do you
Illinois and
travel
kind of
there?
I do.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome. So what's that like? Can you
That, that that
tell
that-
me
I mean
about?
that's one of the best. That's probably, in my opinion, the best perk of opening up my own shop was the opportunity to travel and meet and network with new clients and new attorneys. I doing both prosecution and defense casework makes me um, it gives me a unique perspective in my government casework because I am a defense expert, so I understand kind of I've learned the thought processes behind what a defense attorney is looking at in terms of how they approach a case and mitigate a case, and that has made my government casework a lot better, more
That's really
well-rounded,
cool.
I think.
How
Yeah,
so? Can you tell me the difference in, like, I guess, philosophies, perspectives, coming at something from a defensive perspective or as a prosecutor? Like, what are you
yeah. I
looking for?
mean,
Like, what if I were hiring you and I was a prosecutor, or if I was a defendant? You know, what's the difference between what I'd be asking you to do or the responsibilities that you'd have?
so typically it's this, you're asking me to do the same thing, right? Is, that's why I went into what I do is evidence doesn't have a perspective, have a bias. The evidence is what the evidence is.
Yeah, but interpreting it has a bias.
The interpreting has a bias, absolutely, right? So when I'm dealing with concepts like shooting reconstruction, right, is you can only there is no bias to the measurement of a trajectory flight path, right? It's going to only line up a certain way. It is the interpretation of how that flight path goes with the overall story
Right.
of that case, right? And that is up to the prosecutor or the defense attorney. Where I kind of help them is advising in manners of whether or not something actually could be possible,
Oh,
right? So,
cool.
is it possible that the defendant could have been acting in self-defense? Well, based off of all of this evidence, yes. Or
Cool.
based off of this based off of this gunshot wound and this bloodstain pattern, absolutely not. Your defendant is guilty as sin. You should probably be looking.
Wow. Wait. So what would be the case where that happened? Can you give me some examples of, like, cases that happened that you could describe what gave it away to you that it was possible or not? You know, because I guess with the whole, and I guess the way to kind of keep framing this is beyond a reasonable doubt or not, right? Like, that's all that the court uses.
Yeah.
So you're not saying this for a fact. You're saying within a reasonable doubt, could this person have been acting in self defense, or within a reasonable doubt, is this guy guilty of sin?
When it comes to acting in self-defense, I am just testifying or providing opinion to, what the bloodstain patterns are, or what the shooting reconstruction evidence is, or what the body positioning possibly could have been, and then that data is interpreted into the story by the attorney. So, I had a case in Houston back in February that was a self-defense case, and I ended up testifying to talking about response time. So, kind of a subset of shooting reconstruction is human factors and how we respond under stress, right? So, I was kind of talking a little bit about that earlier about what your body's kind of undergoing,
Yeah.
but like response time to a stimulus, right? So a stimulus being, I'm presented with maybe an armed robber, say for example, is how quick can I respond to that by, what's the average draw time and the average time to draw your gun and fire a shot, right?
Yeah.
Based off of, studies within the past decade, that ranges between 1.7 seconds to 1.42 seconds on average, and there's obviously a standard deviation range there. But we can start taking some of that information and interpreting that across other concepts or other types of evidence that we have, right? So if we can use bloodstain patterns, like in this case, that this is what I did, right? Was looking at the bloodstain patterns to understand the movement of the decedent after he was shot. So that would help me understand the original position that he was in, as well as taking that data and correlating it with the flight paths that he had, of bullet wounds that he had. And so those start to help me understand where he was at specific times when he was shot, which I can then use to
It's
compare
so
against
interesting.
testimonial evidence.
But
Yeah,
can
and so that's what I do a lot of.
but is it so? Does it? I mean, I guess I know this also. I guess from jujitsu just starting that our bodies are capable of falling in ways that we have that if you remove our consciousness or you remove, our brain control, our bodies are capable of falling in ways that we have no way of explaining or, like, even recreating again.
Yeah.
So like someone's getting shot and their body obviously immediately goes, I'm sure, is flooded with, this adrenaline, with this with the stress, with the everything, just like, and you probably don't even remember how you landed, what happened,
Yeah, I
how
mean,
you
so
even fell.
it depends on the nature of the individual wound, right? Is it
Yeah,
a fatal gunshot wound, to where
right, you shot in the leg.
yeah, or is it, something that is,
So what was that case in
non-fatal?
Houston?
In that case, it was a fatal gunshot wound.
Gotcha. And so your job was to prove, because it was self-defense, that the person the person was responding to a threat,
So I'm not proving anything. I am providing
providing
just
potential evidence of whether or
yeah,
not that's possible.
I'm providing factual information about the evidence for the jury to decide if, based off of those facts, that self-defense was reasonable.
Okay.
In this case, they agreed that it was, that self-defense was reasonable, and they acquitted him.
Okay.
And that was the absolute correct answer. And, in my opinion, I very much always did bifurcate personal opinions, right, and personal feelings and
I was
emotional
gonna
feelings
ask, how
from my
often does that
casework.
happen?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, that's kind of the key thing is you have to remain objective throughout all of your analysis, regardless of what type of casework. If you're doing, if you're a police detective or a crime lab analyst or a private examiner. Is that's the whole key point of forensic science, is that it is objective. It does not care about guilt or innocence. It just cares about what is the
Are there a lot of
factual
cases where
information.
you feel that the facts of the scenario were not properly understood, and the results did not manifest the way that you felt the evidence laid out?
Absolutely.
It does
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, it does happen. I mean, we can see that in exoneration cases, right? Is um, you know, evidence can only be misinterpreted, like you said, and that is not just misinterpretation by an analyst, by a forensic analyst, but also by the jury,
Yeah,
right?
that's
It
what I
is,
figured.
if you look at cases like, I think of the case of David Cam,
Mhm.
and so David Cam was. Um, an innocent man who was convicted guilty of murdering his wife and his children. And it was all based off of he was found guilty because of bad bloodstain pattern analysis. The analyst in that case made opinions that there was no factual basis to make.
Mhm.
And so that influences the jury to believe that the
Sure.
weight of that evidence is of greater value than it actually is. And so,
Can you argue that should be illegal to do that?
oh yeah, I mean, I could make that argument all day long, but the problem is that we have and that is a failure of the criminal justice system more than anything,
Right.
because it is up to the trier of fact. That judge is supposed to be the gatekeeper of expert witness testimonial evidence. So when I testify in court, I have to basically state my qualifications and my experience, and then the judge will say that he's recognized as an expert in shooting reconstruction
Right.
or bloodstain pattern, whatever I'm being recognized as an expert in, and then I can give my opinion. I can testify to those opinions and to the factual evidence, right?
Right. Right.
If I'm not found um, to be of sufficient value, or to have sufficient skills and experience, then a lay witness cannot give opinion. Um, I look
That's what
at
people say. Objection, speculation, because that would be the line that people
There's
cross.
there's a ton of different rules in court of what you can object to. Um, yeah, but we have our criminal justice system set up a kind of in a very specific adversarial way for a reason, because the whole idea is that the adversarial system helps the trier of fact, whether that's the judge or the jury, refine all the points down to the truth.
Right.
right? And that's not always that doesn't always work, and we see that in exoneration cases. Blackstone's ratio. There was a rabbi named Maimonides back during the 15th century, and he came up with this this concept that it is better to let 1,000 guilty persons go than to ever imprison an innocent man, right? And then there's a guy named Blackstone back in the 19th century. He was an attorney. He kind of refined it and said, it became 100 guilty persons than to ever, convict an innocent man and put him in prison. And that is very much, I could not agree more. That's why I do the work the way I do, is because the worst thing that we could ever do is put an innocent person in prison,
Oh yeah.
and take away somebody's freedoms. And that is um, something as a detective, as a police officer, that I try that never lose touch of, is the weight of what you are doing, the weight of the power that you have um, in doing criminal investigations is so great. So yeah, God,
It's
that's a tangent that I didn't
No, no,
expect to go
no.
on.
I think it's no. I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing. I want to ask you one last question. First of all, I want to absolutely have you back on the podcast again because this is a blast, and there's 100 more things that I want to get to.
Yeah,
So we'll have to
absolutely.
find time again in the future to do this again, and hear what else you're working on. The last thing I want to ask, two last things I want to ask you, but the last thing I want to ask you is the Han Solo shot. Uh,
Han totally
who
shot
fired? Who
first.
fired? Who shot? Who shot first?
George Lucas tried pacifying it with his revisions and
He's a
edits over the.
revisionist, dude. George Lucas is a revisionist,
He is a
dude.
revisionist. So actually, I just finished the George Lucas biography like 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
Fantastic
Yeah, who wrote it?
biography for. Um,
I will
I'd have to look.
definitely read that.
It's I think it's called George Lucas: A Life. And it is I done that one. I love biographies.
Me too.
Um, I
You know that
just done.
his technology started Pixar.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's so cool. I
Yeah.
love that. That's why
Oh,
Toy
so
Story is a
actually,
homage to
speaking of
Star
Pixar,
Wars.
have you done Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson?
Of course. And I'm working on. There's an amazing book to Pixar and Beyond. The
Okay.
CFO of the company, Lawrence Levy, writes about taking the company public from a business perspective as a CFO of Pixar while it was going public in '95 and working with Steve Jobs and everything like that. And he and I have corresponded a couple of times. I'm dying to get him on the podcast.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but yeah, the Toy Story is a homage to Star Wars.
Yeah, so Steve Jobs, see, I could talk about books all day long. Another great one is Bob Iger's Ride of a Lifetime.
You like that one?
Fan I loved it.
I gotta read it. I gotta read
Yeah, I
it.
highly recommend it because he brings a really great perspective of leadership, and I love
Mhm.
any kind of leadership biographies. I mean, Extreme Ownership, going back to Jocko, right?
Yeah,
Um, Extreme Ownership was one of the first leadership books that I really kind of dived into, and thank God I did it early in my career because that philosophy has very much molded my outlook on my work ethic, and I think that that has been a driving factor of why. One, I'm just kind of neurotic when it comes to diving into a bunch of projects, but really taking that concept of ownership, and the more ownership you take, the more successful you'll be.
yeah. I gotta check out. I gotta check out that George Lucas book. So George
All that
Lucas,
to
you're a
say
vision.
that Han Solo totally shot first.
He did shoot first. Can you explain why you got how you got there?
Yeah, because I watched the original, because the original videos were the best,
Yeah,
New Hope, the unadulterated New Hope from '78 is the only good version.
yeah, yeah. I'm a little sad what happened to the Star Wars world. What do you think of the movie Interstellar?
So, and this is absolutely, this will be a great reason of why we have to have
Another conversation.
another round of conversation is so a side uh, hobby of mine. I'm very much kind of a polymath, and so I love anything that deals with like quantum dynamics and quantum physics. And so the concept of uh, understanding reality, um, you know,
Yeah,
Interstellar is a great movie because one, it's a great,
It's a
it's just
it's a
it's a
masterful piece.
beautifully shot masterpiece. It really is. It is a
Yeah.
cinematic masterpiece. But the concepts of multi dimensions and um, what space time actually is, um, I think is done really well in there. And the concepts of, you know, how black holes work and how we can visualize them and going back to my love of space.
Yeah,
um
I'm so. Oh man,
but yeah,
we need to
it's
talk
really
about.
good. I love how they ended up kind of
Okay, we're gonna have to get back to
rounding
that.
that
We're
out.
gonna have to get back to
Yeah,
that. So,
yeah, I'm a huge proponent of simulation hypothesis, and
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? As time goes on, I think that it feels more and more like inevitable. You know, um, it's pretty. I'm a little nervous that we're a couple of years away from just not being able to discern what reality is from anything, like from AI or from technology, and we're just we have no idea what reality is.
oh yeah.
It's really scary. It's really freaky. But you know what? I do hope that I do hope and I believe that because there's been a cosmic positive karmic history where like putting out goodness and effort and all those things lead to positive consequences, and
Oh
if
yeah.
not on the outside, on the inside, in one way or the other, that things will turn out okay, but just not the way that we expect anything to be.
Yeah, it's that concept of manifestation, right? Is projecting how you want the world around you to be. If you I am a firm believer of if you can dream it, you can do it. There's another Walt Disney quote for you.
That's right.
Um, but if you're not happy with where you are in life, then change it. It really is that simple. You can say, "Oh, but Zach, I've got bills to pay. I've got, my friend, you are only within this particular lifetime here once. So don't forgo
Oh
it. Don't
man,
give it
our
up."
next episode is gonna be so much fun. I'm so
Well,
excited.
yeah, this gets into the really philosophical stance,
Yeah, yeah, but that's the
standpoint.
stuff
But
I love.
it's I work with death on such a regular basis that it has very much given me a perspective on the value of life. Um, you know, I, uh, a friend of mine was killed on duty a couple months ago,
Sorry.
and that was by far the hardest scene I have ever worked, and it very much was kind of a I don't know, an earth-shattering moment or series of moments, right? It really gives you pause for perspective. But life's short. Live it. If you're not happy with it, change it. It really is that simple.
Zach, this has been such a pleasure. I'm so happy that you responded to my email initially, and I'm so happy we made this happen. And I'm so excited for our future conversations. I'm so excited to see the work you're doing and the research that you're doing. And you're literally, dude, you're living science fiction in this world, and it's just science, and it's so cool. And as an observer, I just want to say I'm a huge fan. I really appreciate everything that you're doing.
Well, I greatly appreciate it. I love what I do, and I try and I try and actually live what I preach. And like Humphrey Bogart said at the end of Casablanca, this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
I hope so. I hope so. Zach, thanks so much for the time, man. We're definitely gonna be in touch, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Sounds great. Take care and
It
be
was a real
safe.
pleasure. Good night, everyone. Bye.